Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, Robbie, polls are clear. Fewer and fewer Americans have confidence in our government. Perhaps that's unsurprising given how rarely the government seems to use its power to materially benefit average working Americans, even when there is political consensus on the issues. For example, 80% of Americans think the minimum wage is too low. Yet Democrats scrapped the $15 minimum wage in the American Rescue Plan with little public outcry from mainstream Democrats or Republicans. Moreover, at the same time Floridians went to the ballot box and voted for Trump in 2020, 60% of them also voted for a ballot measure to enact a $15 minimum wage. This is, in fact, the longest stretch in American history without a minimum wage raise. It hasn't gone up since 2009. Yet neither Republicans or Democratic leadership have meaningfully fought to secure what most Americans want. And the minimum wage is far from the only issue Americans overwhelmingly agree on. Take prescription drug prices. 83% of Americans overall, including 95% of Democrats, 82% of independents, and 71% of Republicans support the government negotiating down high drug prices. 9 out of 10 voters support using federal funds to bring broadband to all. 68% want marijuana legalization, and 60% strongly or somewhat support a Green New Deal. And yet, the prevailing narrative out of Washington is that the parties are stuck in figurative and sometimes literal gridlock, and no infrastructure bill is coming to help. With government canceled, people are looking to alternative populist champions, figures who will speak for the people when corporate politicians won't. In 2016 and 2020, Bernie Sanders was the preferred choice of independents as he stood with striking workers, advocated for popular policies, and called out corporate corruption as he's done his whole career. Others, many of whom saw Donald Trump as an outsider who might have the chutzpah to actually drain the swamp, are searching for new populist heroes on the right, voices that consistently champion the material economic interests of the people, individuals who have their finger on the pulse of average working class American priorities, individuals like Tucker Carlson.
The other big change is that the brown M&M has, quote, transitioned from high stilettos to lower block heels, also less sexy. That's progress. M&Ms will not be satisfied until every last cartoon character is deeply unappealing and totally androgynous, until the moment you wouldn't want to have a drink with any one of them. That's the goal. When you're totally turned off, we've achieved equity. They've won.
Now, if you were working a job this weekend that doesn't allow you to spend 8 hours a day on Twitter, you might have missed Tucker Carlson's latest cancel culture crusade. It's a battle to keep the green M&M slutty. The self-styled populist spent Friday evening objecting to a rebrand of the nostalgic candy, intended to make the characters more accessible. Among other subtle changes, the heel height of the brown M&M is going from stiletto to block heel, and the green's go-go boots are being swapped out for sneakers.
Now, there are a few significant changes. Most notably, the company has taken the focus off its character's gender by putting the brown M&Ms in slightly shorter heels and changing the stance of the green M&M so she's no longer turning tricks for the rough trade down at the wharf.
So per that clip, Carlson and conservatives obviously weren't the only ones bothered by the rebrand. Of course, it's just funny to think about an ad executive in some office somewhere being paid a salary to make anthropomorphic candy more relatable by changing its footwear. And plenty of leftists pointed out the senselessness of trying to address gender inequality by tweaking a cartoon, all while ignoring that candy manufacturers Hershey, Nestle, and Mars are all facing a child slavery lawsuit surrounding their cocoa harvesting practices. But the reason I'm focusing on Carlson, besides his barely restrained horniness for a cartoon candy, is that he, unlike liberal late-night hosts, has styled himself as an anti-woke populist who can cut through all the CNN, CRT, M&M, PPE, left culture war mishigas to speak to the people's needs. Of course, it's quite the opposite. Tucker Carlson is perhaps America's biggest culture war warrior, focusing disproportionately on silly nothings like a candy rebrand, which, I must stress, is seen as equally absurd by folks across the political divide, instead of economic populism. And importantly, this is no accident. If the conversation remains focused on the fact that the left is coming for your candy, your values, and Christmas, it can ignore that the right isn't offering a living wage, healthcare solutions, or even a basic infrastructure plan. By lobbing these culture bombs, the right incites a reactionary center-left, which in turn talks endlessly about right-wing brain rot, while also offering nothing material to voters. Look what's happening in an ineffectual Democratic Congress right now. Instead of responding meaningfully to criticism from the base who wonder why Biden won't use his executive authority to fulfill campaign promises like canceling at least $10,000 of student debt, establishment Democrats denounce Democratic Party critics as bad faith actors, whether they are making critiques from the right or the left. As Democratic strategist Paul Begala put it just last week, the problem is not that Democrats have bad leaders, it's that they have bad followers. With more fingers being pointed in that Spider-Man meme, it's easy to lose track of the fact that most Americans agree on the big things. And that's the goal of the conservative culture wars and the liberal counter-parry of superficial identity politics. They want us divided. Both corporate media camps, liberal and conservative, serve the purpose of concealing the huge and growing gap between what the people want and what their representatives will fight for. The corporate media's job is to obscure the consensus among working class and poor Americans on healthcare, corporate corruption, the negative influence of money in politics, marijuana legalization, stimulus checks, and on and on and on. This is what happens to the discourse. One side says to vote Republican is to hate inclusivity. The other sees the green M&M as the latest person of color whose needs are getting more attention than their own. Few in corporate media are talking about the fact that neither party is making sure basic material needs are met. And meanwhile, MSNBC, Fox, and CNN all keep running ads paid for by military contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and big banks. Ask yourself why that is. It's not because they think your aunt is in the market for an F-16. Now, there is a populist movement surging in America, but it's not being led by Tucker Carlson, the Tyson chicken heir, or any of the other millionaires at Fox or in Congress who perform working class approachability for the cameras before joining corporate lobbyists for a round of golf or insider trading. Real populists, like Bernie Sanders' policy advisor, Warren Gunnels, focus on the real story. That the Mars Candy family, which has $153.8 billion in wealth, has become $50 billion richer during the pandemic and has used its wealth to lobby Congress to repeal the estate tax. More goodies for the 1%. Admittedly, the story is less sexy than Green's go-go boots, but it is, in fact, the one that matters. Now, I don't mean to be a killjoy. It is fun to make fun of pop culture absurdity. M&Ms are good content, I get it. And frankly, as a leggy, round-faced woman who was also named after a color, I identify with what Ms. Green is going through. Hashtag representation matters. This is just a cautionary note to remember who is served by these stories. Your partner in politics may disagree with you on the amount of arch support an anthropomorphic girl candy deserves, but never forget that you probably agree on what really matters. So, Robbie, this was a lot of fun. I love the story as much as anybody else, but as I saw the battle lines being drawn over this issue, I couldn't help but be reminded of how this is always what we focus on, and this is always how it goes. It's so frustrating to me.
It is frustrating, yeah, and this is a very funny story. But you're right to say, like a lot of people do think this is stupid, right? I think many people, probably most people, have the reaction, no, it's not the most important thing on earth, and also there's no political solution to it. So the
right.
funny thing to concentrate all our coverage of something like this is that there's nothing to be done. Right. Still, the fact that corporations increasingly are trying to cater to a certain unrepresentative, very online customer, the millennial or younger, very liberal, very identity politics kind of person with this kind of thing is frustrating because there are more people who are like, the M&Ms were just fine. Lola Bunny was just fine. That's the one, you're the Space Jam character who they totally desexualized for the sequel movie. Where I'm like, that was very central to the character. You can't have any, now I'm going to sound like Tucker, who I like, by the way. I don't agree with everything he has to say, but
look, I will say, on some level, I think the story is overstated because it's not just that they lowered her heel, I think, to make her more sex neutral or something. Block heels are in. Stilettos have been out for a while. That's just fashion. But more to the point, I think that while liberals or the left might have more sympathy with the idea of trying to move norms forward with the times, the frustration from the left's perspective is that these kind of symbolic gestures are all we ever get. And they're often coming from corporate entities, as in this case, that are only doing this not because they care about the equality of women in the workplace or any of this kind of thing, but because they want to distract from the bigger issues, like the fact that they're being sued for child slavery.
It's that meme of the person drowning and their hand is above the water, and there's a hand reaching out and it just high fives the drowning hand.
Exactly, exactly. And meanwhile, we're feeling very divided. We're feeling very different from each other when we really have so much in common.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay with us.
I'm looking forward to your radar next.